We'll begin tonight from Washington, where the United States President Joe Biden will address African leaders later this evening in continuation of the U.S.-Africa Summit. Arise News correspondent Adesuwa Omoruan reports from Washington that Biden is expected to discuss support for democracy, economic development, and new financial commitments, a region that in recent years has taken a back seat to other U.S. priorities. Our priority will be Nigeria and other countries holding elections in 2023. She reports that while Washington will also tout its support for food security and climate change, there will be another, likely unspoken message that the United States is a better partner for Africa than China is. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Washington will bring resources to the table and commit $55 billion to Africa over the next 3 years. And for more on this, let's speak with our Arise correspondent Adesuwa Omoruan, who joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Hello, Adesuwa. Can you bring us up to speed about today's formal address by U.S. President Joe Biden to the African leaders? What will Joe Biden be bringing to the table? Adesuwa.
Okay. Great, Kristen, great to be here. In the spirit of the World Cup and with Morocco being the only African nation first time to be in the semi-finals, may I say that President Biden tried to score some goals. It is left to be seen if that was over the bar or it went to the back of the net. We just finished listening to President Joe Biden speaking for the first time at the summit. He reeled out so many figures, Christian, so many figures, how America would help Africa fight cybersecurity. That was one major one. Another major thing President Biden announced moments ago was the signing of an MOU with the AFCFTA Secretariat. That's the single integrated market on the African continent, which is good news. And that's one of the high points a lot of people have been looking forward to at the summit. Because what we've had in the past is Africa failing to speak with one voice, especially on economic issues outside of the continent. And so the AFCFTA came on board. It's in its second phase of implementation, but it was also at risk of being undone with bilateral relations countries signed with the likes of the US and others. But hearing that President Biden and the United States has now signed that MOU with the AFCFTA, it is good news. It does mean that America will likely be trading with the African continent multilaterally. We haven't seen the details of this MOU and what they entail, but like I said, it was a lot of figures and somewhat difficult to keep up with. In the next couple of days, we will be looking at them. Analysts all over the continent and outside of the continent will break those figures down to see what they really translate to as America promises a partnership with Africa, one that drives the relationship upwards and not down. Christian?
Yeah, thanks so very much, Adesuwa. I'm sure the figures you're talking about, humongous, must be in their billions, because already, as we've been told, $55 billion is already on the table for another 3-year period. So tell us about Nigeria. Is of particular interest to the U.S. because of its general elections due in February next year. That's just about less than 3 months, so to speak. How is the United States, helping Nigeria and other countries that will be in transition by next year? Adesuwa.
Yes, Christian. Any moment from now, President Muhammadu Buhari and 4 other African leaders, including Gabon, Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and even Madagascar. So Nigeria and those 5 other countries will be having elections come 2023. Any moment from now, they should be arriving the White House to meet with President Joe Biden. When it comes to elections in Africa, we do know that the decision of the United States is not written in black and white. However, we do know that the U.S. has been playing the democracy police for a long time. Christian, you would recall the report that was released recently that democracy has been on the decline across the world and not just in Africa, while autocratic rule has been on the rise. President Joe Biden understands that far too well, because for the first time, the report also says democracy was on a decline in the United States. And we do understand that this meeting with these leaders will discuss issues of democracy, good governance, and stability. Like President Biden said moments ago, the stability of Africa should concern everyone, because a prosperous Africa bolsters global economy. And he also said, while this summit is about a two-way trade, investment, infrastructure, and all of that on the continent, people are wondering why the U.S. is interested in democracy. And he said, you know, you cannot have trade, investment, infrastructure without having stability, without having democracy. And those are some of the conversations we expect that President Biden will be having with these African leaders, including President Muhammadu Buhari. You would also understand that the U.S. has never come out outrightly to support any candidate when it comes to elections, particularly in Nigeria. But we have seen in recent times the United States imposing visa bans on those who are set to rig elections in Nigeria and those who have manipulated elections. So again, we'll be expecting that while the U.S. does not come out outrightly to support any of the candidates in the forthcoming elections in Nigeria, it will be setting some straight conversations about how Nigeria cannot fail as the largest democracy on the continent of Africa, which has seen uninterrupted, democracy in the past 2 decades, Christian.
Yes, indeed, we cannot afford to fail at all. But now let's look at the continent as a whole again, Adesuwa, before we'll call it a day with you. Africa seems to be the beautiful bride here. Would you describe the overtures from China, from America as a second, scramble for Africa? We've seen that coming from Europe as well. And we even heard a top American official saying that, look, a partnership with the U.S. is better than a partnership with China. What are your thoughts here?
Christian, throughout the summit, and even listening to President Biden for the first time at the summit, he was very careful not to make this about a choice for Africa to make. He was very careful not to dictate to African leaders. I think the summit, although critics have said the fact that you invite an entire continent to this summit does smack of some belittling. But the fact that this summit is being held with leaders of the continent does demonstrate that Africa is no longer coming to Washington or this summit to come and beg for aid. They're not coming to genuflect. They are coming, as the U.S. has said throughout the summit and in the build-up, as partners. With the largest population and, of course, youngest, fastest growing population, at least 1.3 billion people, set to double, especially when it comes to the young people in 2050. 1 in 4 people will be Africans in 2050. Talk about the natural resources in Africa that the West relies upon so much. And, all of those, I think Africa has really come of age, Christian. It is no longer the Africa that depends on aid. And that's what the African leaders at the summit that we have heard so far tell the United States. Yes, the U.S. is a big player when it comes to aid for the sub-Saharan Africa. But when it comes to trade, investment, infrastructure, we don't see the U.S. Most of the infrastructure that has sprung up across the continent have China written all over them. So yes, there's a scrabble for Africa, whether the U.S. likes to say it or not, whether they like to make this about a choice or not. They are trying to play the catch-up game. Africa is definitely that beautiful bride, as we say, Christian.
Indeed, the beautiful brides that Africa is, and we just hope that the leaders will, live up to expectations, explore the natural and human resources, just like the Ghanaian president, chided too, that they shouldn't come, to the table a begging. Adesuwa Omoruan, thanks so very much. Live from Washington, D.C., attending the Africa-US Summit.